Disease is a debilitating illness, most often transmitted through exposure to tick bites. And while the disease is not formally recognised here in Australia, interest in the condition has been thrown back into the spotlight.
I know what it feels like to not want to get out of bed from bone pains and exhaustion.
For 15 years, international model Bella Hadid has suffered in silence, recently opening up to her fans about living with Lyme disease in a candid Instagram post. And she's not alone. Justin Bieber, Shania Twain, Avril Lavigne also living with the chronic condition.
I was seeing every specialist and literally the top doctors. This is what they do to a lot of people that have Lyme disease. They don't have an answer for them.
So tough, isn't it? Lyme disease specialist Dr. Richard Horowitz joins us now from New York. Doctor, thank you so much for your time. You've been treating Lyme disease for 28 years. You're an expert in this field. Why is it so commonly misunderstood still?
So the problem with Lyme disease is that it's known as the great imitator. So Lyme disease causes a chronic fatiguing musculoskeletal illness with neuropsychiatric issues. So it can look like chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, myalgic encephalomyelitis, autoimmune illness. It causes neuropsychiatric symptoms like depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, psychosis. It can even look like Alzheimer's disease with dementia. So this disease mimics a lot of diseases, and it's even worse now with long COVID, because many of the symptoms you're seeing with long COVID are exactly the same symptoms you see with chronic Lyme disease, with fatigue, aches and pains, headaches, brain fog, low blood pressure, insomnia, even neuropsychiatric issues. So you have to be able to make the diagnosis as it overlaps a lot of other illnesses.
Right. So can you explain why Lyme disease is not recognised here in Australia?
So, I had worked a bit with the Lyme Disease Association of Australia, and I had presented to your Australian government and parliament several years ago. When I was looking at the scientific studies, there were many studies that were done in the 1980s and 90s on tick-borne infections in Australia, and clearly it showed there were many, such as rickettsial infections, Bartonella, Q fever. There were many of them that showed up, but the problem is they were not finding the type of Borrelia. Borrelia burgdorferi is the name of the organism that causes Lyme. They were not finding that particular Borrelia species in Australia. They were finding relapsing fever Borrelia, which is a cousin. So, I think the problem right now is that, and I've had Australian patients come to see me, there is a Lyme-like illness in Australia. There are people that come in with bullseye rashes, but the problem is they've not been able to identify the actual Borrelia species, and therefore it's not officially recognized by the Australian government and by the health authorities.
Well, that makes it even harder for Australians, I suppose, especially those who may contract it overseas. So what kind of treatment is available to people here in Australia at the moment?
So right now, unfortunately, the treatments are restricted because chronic Lyme disease is not recognized in Australia. There's a political issue right now in the United States and in the world regarding what causes chronic Lyme disease. I've been studying it now for almost 40 years. I've worked for HHS, for our governmental agencies. We gave recommendations to Congress. I presently work for the New York State Department of Health. So the problem right now is, because there's so much controversy on Lyme disease, if you go to a doctor in Australia and you tell them you have chronic Lyme disease, according to the Lyme Disease Association of Australia, 80% of those people are going to be turned away.
Wow.
There are no Lyme doctors at this point in Australia to treat you. You will be told you have chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, myalgic encephalomyelitis, everything but Lyme disease, even though we have been developing short, effective oral protocols for Lyme. They are not available in Australia at this point in time.
Dr. Horowitz, we're almost out of time. So what are the dangers of leaving Lyme disease untreated? As you said, it could be overlooked here in Australia.
So it can cause Lyme carditis. You can have heart block and die from it. People can get paralyzed from it. It can cause dementia-type symptoms looking like Alzheimer's disease. People have horrible arthritis where they can't walk. So it's really a debilitating illness with chronic fatigue, aches and pains, memory concentration problems. It causes a lot of disability and probably is costing the healthcare system a lot of money with people not recognizing it.
There's a link on the screen there if you'd like to know some more. Dr. Horowitz, we appreciate your time this morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
Coming up on Today Extra.